Have you ever thought about why you're getting paid what you get paid at work? If you haven't, let me give you a quick breakdown on how companies generally determine what compensation package they're going to give their employees. Many companies will tell you that you are part of their family and that they care about you, but they don't decide your pay like they're treating you like family. In fact, I always explain to people that for the most part, you're just a number on a line. The company needs you to fill a certain role, but you're replaceable. If you got hit by a car tomorrow, the company might miss you, but they're going to find someone to fill your shoes. And that's exactly why companies pay you just enough to make sure that you're going to take the job and stay. Companies determine how much they will pay you based on the market for your services. It's no different than when you go out to buy something from the store. When you go to the store, you ask yourself, why would I pay this much for something here when I can get it from that other store for less? And that's how prices get determined. Now, if you understand this concept, that's why we need minimum wage laws and other laws that allow working people to form unions, because employers will always try to push wages down. I'm sure you've heard an employer say, if you don't like it here, go somewhere else. I'll find someone to replace you. Because unfortunately, there are more people out there that need to work than there are jobs. So employers have an advantage in this negotiation. It's actually happening right now. Every day, people are working for less than minimum wage and getting cash payments because they're desperate for work. It's not because they want it that way. It's because that's what the market is creating. So make sure, if you don't have a union at work, form one. Because I would almost guarantee that you're not getting paid as much as you could be getting paid where you work. Let me ask you a question. How much is your life worth? Is your life really worth $15 an hour or less? Is it right for your employer to determine what your life is worth? I don't think so. And I hope you don't either. When you go to work every day, you're trading the most valuable thing that you have, your time. You are literally giving the time of your life to helping the company you work for make money. And you're never going to get that time back. You will spend the majority of your life devoted to work. In a 24-hour day, we all spend about 8 hours sleeping. We spend at least 8 hours of it working and probably about 2 hours commuting and preparing to go to work. That's 18 hours a day. That leaves us 6 hours for ourselves each day. And then when we stop working and retire, if we're lucky enough, most people are too old or too sick to do the things that they want to do. In fact, most people die a few years after they retire. So if you're going to spend more than half of your useful life working to help companies make a profit, then you better make sure that you're getting everything you can from them. I want to make sure that if you're going to trade your life to help other people make a profit, that you have someone in your corner to make sure that you're getting the best deal possible from your employer. The most important thing that I do as a lawyer is not fighting in the courtroom. It's educating people about their rights so they don't become victims. Please be part of our community and work toward making companies responsible for your well-being instead of just company profitability. All you have to do is be aware of your rights at work and spread the word. Subscribe to our free newsletter, call us for free if you have questions about your rights at work, and download our free ebooks. Because none of us should spend our working lives struggling to make ends meet or making less than what we could be making. Do you know what the minimum wage is? Wage theft is one of the most common workplace violations happening today. To prevent it, there are two concepts you need to understand. The first is the minimum wage, and the second is overtime. And these might seem like simple concepts, but if they were so simple, there wouldn't be tens of thousands of lawsuits filed each year for these violations. So this video briefly explains some of the main concepts about the minimum wage. First, what is the minimum wage? The minimum wage is the least amount of money your boss can pay you for the time you work. The minimum wage has been changing each year in New York, and it's going to continue to change for the next few years. So I don't want to give you the rate in this video because it's going to be different. But if you have questions about receiving the minimum wage, you can call us for a free wage evaluation. Second, how to make sure you receive the minimum wage. You have to know a few things. What the minimum wage rate is, how many hours you actually worked, and how much you were paid. If you know these three things, you can check to make sure the company paid you at least the minimum wage for all the hours you worked. All you have to do is divide the total hours you worked by the gross wages. That's the pre-tax wages. If the number is at or equal to the minimum wage, then you're all set. If not, then you might be a victim of wage theft. If you have questions, contact us for a free wage evaluation. You could also learn how employers violate the minimum wage laws by checking out our video on how companies don't pay the minimum wage, or download our free ebook on how to maximize your income. And you could get that right here. Do you know what overtime really is? Wage theft is one of the most common workplace violations happening today. To prevent it, there are two concepts you need to understand. The first is the minimum wage, and the second is overtime. And these might seem like simple concepts, but if they were so simple, there wouldn't be tens of thousands of lawsuits filed each year for these violations. So this video briefly explains some of the main concepts about overtime. So the first thing I want to talk about is what is overtime. The federal and New York state law both require employers to pay you 1.5 times your regular rate of pay for any time you work more than 40 hours in a work week. To make sure you are getting the proper overtime, you need to know three things. You need to know the compensable work hours you worked in a week. Overtime is always computed on a weekly basis. Even if you're paid bi-weekly, your boss has to compute overtime on a weekly basis. Second, you have to know your regular rate of pay. Overtime is computed on an hourly basis. Many times people who should be getting overtime aren't because their boss gives them a salary or pays them by the piece or the job. For example, they get paid $100 a day. But the law generally requires that your boss divide all your weekly earnings by all the hours you worked. And then the employer has to pay you overtime premium on the hours worked over 40. The third thing you need to know is the total amount of pay you receive from the company in the week. The law generally requires that all forms of compensation be factored into your overtime, not just your hourly rate of pay. If your boss isn't including all forms of pay into your total weekly earnings when computing overtime, you might be getting shortchanged. To learn more about how employers violate the overtime laws, check out our video on how companies don't pay overtime, or you can download our free ebook on how to maximize your income here. Have you ever heard of the term wage theft? Wage theft is one of the most common workplace violations happening today. To prevent it, there are two concepts you need to understand. The first is the minimum wage, and the second is overtime. Now, these might seem like simple concepts, but if they're so simple, there wouldn't be tens of thousands of lawsuits filed each year for the violations. So this video briefly explains some of the concepts about wage theft. Wage theft is a general term used for when employers don't pay employees all the wages they're lawfully required to pay. There are three primary ways that employers steal wages. The first is that they don't count all your work hours. Sometimes employers will tell you that they don't include certain work time as compensable time. The best example of this is in the construction industry. Many times employers require workers to come to the company headquarters to load tools onto work trucks, but they won't pay the employees until they get to the construction site out in the field. These employees are losing the time they spend loading the trucks and driving to the work sites, and that can cost you an entire day's pay each week or even more. The second thing that companies do to steal wages is by paying you in a lump sum, salary, or by the job when you work more than 40 hours in a week. A lot of times when employees work many hours, companies tell their employees that they pay a salary for all hours worked, so they're guaranteed money when times are slow. But this is generally a scam. The employee never works less hours, and an employer is not allowed to not pay you overtime, even if they give you a salary or a set rate of pay. If you work more than 40 hours and you're not exempt from the overtime laws, then you should be getting an overtime premium. And the third thing that they do is that they just don't pay the rates required by law. Some employers just bully employees and tell them that they don't pay overtime. Instead, they pay the straight time hours for overtime work, or they just tell the employees to work off the clock. Employers cannot pick and choose if they pay overtime. Unless there's an exemption, you are entitled to overtime pay. If you want to learn more about how employers violate the minimum wage laws or overtime laws, check out our video on how companies don't pay minimum wage, or download our free ebook on how to maximize your income here. Do you work more than 40 hours in a work week and wondering if you should be getting paid overtime? That's what this video is designed to address. Not every employee is entitled to overtime under the New York and federal law. There are groups of workers who are categorized as exempt. However, there are a few rules that must be met for an employee to be considered exempt. I'm going to give you the two main rules that apply. The first is that the employee must be paid a salary of a certain amount. And these amounts have been changing, and they're different under federal and state law. So if you have questions about the amount of the salary, you should give us a call. However, if you're paid an hourly wage, then you cannot be exempt from the overtime laws. The second main factor is that you have to be working in an exempt category of employment. There are four main exempt categories that employees can fall into. There's something called the outside sales exemption, and this covers employees that work in sales outside of a company. There's the learned professional exemption, and this covers people working in professions that generally require a lot of education, like doctors, lawyers, and accountants. The executive exemption, this applies to people in a management-related position, and there's the administrative exemption. This applies to people who generally work in administrative departments of a company, like accounting, bookkeeping, finance, or human resources. Each of these areas has even more tests and factors that you need to assess in order to determine if you're an exempt employee. So if you're working more than 40 hours in a week regularly, and you want to know if you should be getting paid overtime, give us a call for a free wage evaluation. Are you in business for yourself, or are you an employee? The real question is, are you an independent contractor? A lot of times employers will not pay you correctly by labeling you as an independent contractor, but that is not a decision that your boss can just make. The law applies a certain test to determine if you're an independent contractor. And employers mislabel people as independent contractors because it saves them money. When someone is a real independent contractor, it means they are in business for themselves. Independent contractors are not entitled to minimum wage, overtime, workers' compensation, or disability insurance benefits. So employers take advantage of misclassifying employees as independent contractors. In New York, the law applies what's called an economic reality test to determine if you're an independent contractor. But the main factor the law considers is who controls how the work gets done. If your boss can tell you how to do the job, set the hours, set the pay, control whether or not you can have someone work in your place, then you're not an independent contractor. To be honest, the test is vague and somewhat hard to apply. So if you're being paid as an independent contractor, contact us and we'll analyze the situation for no cost. Have you recently lost your job and you felt like it was unfair? That's generally known as wrongful termination. So I want to talk about what wrongful termination is. I get a lot of calls from people who just lost their job and they feel the situation was just so unfair that the company must have broke the law. But most of the time the person is right about the termination being unfair, but they were wrong that it was unlawful. For the most part, an employer is free to fire you whenever they want, even if it's not fair. The reason that employers can do this is because in New York and most other states, you are considered an at-will employee. At-will employees work at the will of their employer, which means that the boss can pretty much determine any working condition they want as long as it's not retaliatory or discriminatory or violates the wage and hour laws. Remember, just because your boss might be a jerk, being a jerk isn't against the law. The only general exception to the at-will employment situation is if you were retaliated against or discriminated against. If your boss took some adverse employment action against you because you belong to a protected class or because you engaged in protected activity, then you most likely will be able to sue your employer. Generally, it's not worth analyzing the situation yourself. If you lost your job, call us and let us know what happened, and we can tell you whether or not you might be able to build a case for wrongful termination. Is your employer targeting you because you stood up for yourself at work? That's known as retaliation. Retaliation lawsuits are some of the most successful workplace lawsuits. Retaliation occurs when your boss takes any adverse employment action against you because you threatened to report something or you did report something. There are many different laws under which you can bring a retaliation lawsuit, but there are 4 main laws offering retaliation protection. The first set of laws are the wage and hour laws. So if you threaten to report your employer to the Department of Labor or threaten to file a lawsuit and your employer fires you for that, you'd have a retaliation claim against them. The second set is the family leave laws. If your boss fires you because you tried to take leave using the Family and Medical Leave Act or New York Family Leave Act, you'd be able to sue for that. The third set are the discrimination laws. If you complain that you believe you were being discriminated against or that you believe discrimination was occurring and you had a demotion or suspended or were fired, then you'd have a retaliation lawsuit for that. And the fourth set are the whistleblower laws. So if your boss was actually breaking the law and you reported this to the employer and they fired you for that, you could bring a New York State whistleblower lawsuit. It's hard proving retaliation because employers always wait to find some reason to justify taking some adverse employment action against you. So the thing you always want to do is to record the complaint. If you're going to complain, don't be quiet about it. Record the conversation, send a written email or text message, or bring a witness who's not going to be scared to come forward if you lose your job. Proving the complaint is the most important thing. Otherwise, the company is just going to deny that you ever complained to them. So although you might find yourself suffering by losing your job for voicing your concerns at work, the upside is that many employees who bring retaliation lawsuits are successful. So if you want to make a complaint, just make sure that you do it the right way. Let's talk about what discrimination is. I usually receive calls from employees who think their boss is discriminating against them because something seems unfair. Many times it doesn't rise to the level of discrimination, or they don't have the right evidence to put the argument together. So I thought it would be important to clarify the two main forms of discrimination that exist. The first form of discrimination is what's called disparate treatment. And all that means is that you're being treated differently than someone else. An example of this would be a women's clothing store saying that they are only going to hire women sales agents in their store. You might be able to understand why a women's clothing store would only want to hire a woman salesperson, but there's not a justification for excluding men from the job. Companies are required to hire people based on their qualifications, so they're not allowed to treat you differently because you're of a certain gender or some other protected reason. The second form is called disparate impact, and this means that the company you work for has a policy or practice in place that doesn't seem to treat people differently, but the policy results in people being excluded from the same opportunities as others. An old example of this would be a company that puts an education requirement in place. If a company by policy will only hire people with a bachelor's degree, they might be excluding a certain demographic of qualified people. The company must be able to show why the college education is a requirement for the job if they want to exclude certain groups of people from an employment opportunity. Employment discrimination is complex, and it's a harder area of law to prove. We have a free ebook that you can access here for a detailed breakdown of employment discrimination, and you can always contact us if you have any questions. How do you prove discrimination? In an earlier post, I outlined the two primary types of discrimination. So if you know what discrimination is, you might want to know how you determine if you've been discriminated against. Under New York and federal law, you have to be able to prove a few things if you want to bring a successful discrimination lawsuit against your employer. First thing you need to prove is that you work in a company that employs more than 4 employees, that's under New York law, or more than 15 employees to be protected under federal law. The second is you have to be an employee, not an independent contractor. The third is that you have to be a member of a protected class. You also have to prove that you suffered an adverse employment action, like being suspended or terminated, and that the adverse employment action occurred because you are a member of a protected class. And the last and main thing is you have to prove pretext generally. In most, if not all cases, your employer is going to have a non-discriminatory explanation for why he took a bad action against you. For example, if you didn't get a promotion over someone else, your employer might say you didn't have the qualifications like the other employee did. So when your employer makes up a reason to cover up the discrimination, that's called pretext. You must be able to prove that the employer's excuse is not true. And the last thing you have to do is prove damages. You have to show the harm that you suffered as a result of the adverse employment action. If you want to learn more about how to prove discrimination, download our free ebook on discrimination generally. You can get that here. I find that pregnancy discrimination is one of the more common forms of discrimination because although you might be totally excited about your new family member, for the most part, employers are not. To many companies, your pregnancy is going to be a total distraction and an inconvenience to them. Having to take maternity leave, having to make accommodations for feeding your child after you return to work, having to deal with you taking time off because your child is sick, and going to the doctor repeatedly while you're pregnant are seen as annoyances to many business owners. The good news is that it's unlawful for an employer to take any negative action against you because you're pregnant, have a medical-related issue caused by your pregnancy, or due to childbirth. The two most common scenarios where pregnancy discrimination occurs is when you're out on leave or if you have a pregnancy-related medical issue. If you have a medical-related complication from your pregnancy, you might be protected under the disability laws, which require your employer to make reasonable accommodations to your working conditions so you can keep performing your job. If you recently became pregnant and lost your job, or if you're worried about losing your job, feel free to contact us with your specific questions and we could help walk you through your options. Do you have some kind of serious medical condition that affects your day-to-day living? That's generally protected under the disability discrimination laws. Disability discrimination was one of the most common forms of discrimination. Employers view people with medical issues as an inconvenience. Fortunately, the discrimination laws provide some unique protections for people with disabilities. The most powerful aspect of the disability discrimination laws is the right to request and receive reasonable accommodations to your working conditions. For example, let's say that you have recently been diagnosed with cancer and require ongoing medical treatment. Your employer might be callous and tell you that the company only provides a certain amount of sick days, and if you exceed those, then you're out of luck. But maybe you need a few extra days for a period of time or a few more weeks of unpaid medical leave to get some extra treatment or to recuperate. You could request the extra unpaid time as a reasonable accommodation. Unless your employer can prove that giving you the extra medical leave would create an undue hardship to the business, you're generally going to be entitled to take the leave. If you've always suffered with a disability, or if you've recently been in an accident or became seriously ill and you're concerned about protecting your job, call us at no charge and we could talk to you about what your options are with the workplace. Harassment is a form of discrimination. Harassment occurs when you're being subject to a work environment that is intimidating, hostile, or offensive. But this would be based on how a reasonable person looks at the situation. It's not enough that something is annoying or happening once or twice, unless it's extreme. But if there's ongoing improper joking, threats, insults that's actually part of the work environment, you don't have to put up with it. Harassment also has to be unwelcome and based on you being part of a protected class, such as your race, your color, religion, sex, including pregnancy, your national origin, disability, or genetic information. If you're being harassed at work, don't quit. You're much better off when you file a claim against the company while you're still working there, because you're going to be able to gather more evidence. If you're a target of workplace harassment, that generally means that your coworkers or your management is targeting you, and they're going to have a clique of people who are going to back them up against your accusations. That means that you're going to have some kind of evidence to disprove more than one person. The easiest and the best way to do that is by staying at work and standing up for yourself. Take that with a grain of salt, though. If the harassment's having a severe detrimental effect on your physical or mental health, obviously making sure you're safe is much more important than winning a lawsuit. But the point is that the best strategy to help you build a case is you staying at the company. I know that harassment can be uncomfortable and it's unpleasant to deal with, so don't put up with it. Give us a call if you need some advice. If you watched our video that explained general workplace harassment, we indicated that we would make this video on sexual harassment as well. Sexual harassment is a little different than general harassment. If you want to watch the video on general harassment, you can go watch that. Sexual harassment takes two forms. There's what's called quid pro quo, and the other form is called hostile work environment. The hostile work environment for a sexual harassment claim falls under the same guidelines as general harassment. The only thing that makes it sexual harassment is that you're being harassed by ongoing sexually based conduct. For example, men who constantly proposition women for sex and make sexual gestures in the workplace. If this conduct is ongoing and improper, obviously it's not permissible. However, the other form of sexual harassment that is not as well known is quid pro quo harassment. And that's when a person with authority in the company tells you that if you do something sexual for them, then they're going to do something beneficial for you, like give you a raise or some other workplace benefit. It can also be the reverse, that you're not given a benefit because you refuse to engage in some type of sexual activity. People, primarily women, unfortunately, need to be aware of both types of harassment at work. And the number one way to combat this is if all the people being subject to either type of harassment come together and bring a class action lawsuit if possible. The more people who are impacted by the policy that stand up for themselves, the better chance they have at proving the case. If you're being subject to unwanted sexual advances, or your employer is tying a benefit to you engaging in sexual activity, don't put up with it. Give us a call. An often overlooked form of discrimination is discrimination in pay rates. Companies are not allowed to pay women a rate of pay less than men performing the same work, or men less pay than women are performing the same work. However, pay discrimination happens all the time, and because people don't usually know what their coworkers are earning, companies tend to get away with this violation. Pay discrimination occurs if a company does not have legitimate basis for paying people differently than members of the opposite sex. If there's a bona fide seniority system or a merit system in place, and the company follows that consistently, then they're generally not going to be liable. Also, if the difference in pay is based on education levels, experience, or training, the company generally won't be liable for having unequal pay rates. But in my experience, most non-union companies have very arbitrary systems they put in place for determining employee pay rates. They might start most people out at the same rate of pay, but when it comes to giving raises, most companies do not have standard formulas and policies to determine what employees earn. Instead, it's left to the discretion of low-end supervisors that many times play favorites. So if you suspect there might be favoritism occurring at work, you might not be wrong. You might want to start taking an informal survey to see how raises are given and what pay rates people in the same position as you are earning. If you find that there's no rhyme or reason to the differences in pay, you might be experiencing equal pay discrimination. Give us a call, let us know what you found out, and we're here to help. How do you protect your job if you become sick or disabled? One of the biggest challenges working people face is being pushed out the door at work when they become sick or disabled. In my experience, companies provide a limited amount of sick time and personal days, and once you start exceeding that paid time off, they start pressuring you to figure something out so you don't become an inconvenience to the business. But unless you're permanently disabled and you can no longer work, then there's something you could do to protect yourself at work when you need to take leave because of ill health. There are 4 major laws that protect people when they're sick or disabled. For short-term leave needs, there is the Family Medical Leave Act and the New York Paid Family Leave Act. These 2 laws allow you to take up to 12 weeks of time off from work each year if you have a serious illness or a covered family member that has a serious illness. This leave can be taken all at once or incrementally in periods of time as small as 1 hour. For long-term medical issues, there's the American with Disabilities Act and the New York State Human Rights Law. These laws require that your employer provide you with a reasonable accommodation at work to enable you to work with a disability as long as the accommodation doesn't cause the company an undue hardship. So many times when you may have run out of short-term leave protection, you still might be able to take additional leave under these 2 laws. So if you're suffering from a disability or have recently been diagnosed with a serious illness and are experiencing pressure at work, don't feel like you have no options. You can take steps to make sure that you don't lose your job just because your employer feels like you are a burden on the company. Someone recently came to me and asked me, if you could only do one thing to help working people, one specific action, what would it be? Would it be to end discrimination or to make sure everyone was paid correctly? Without question, if I could snap my fingers and make one single change, it would be for everybody to form a union where they work. And because so many people know nothing about this right, they look at me totally confused. See, most people don't know what a union is. They have an idea, but they really have no real understanding of the power it gives them. If I asked you, would you rather, 1, have your employer make every single decision concerning your economic well-being, or 2, would you rather make it so your employer can't make a single change to your working conditions unless you and your boss agree to the change? Without a doubt, every person would say that they would rather have control over their life. That is what forming a union at work does. A union is you. It is when you and your coworkers make a decision that they no longer want the company to make the decisions about their working conditions without negotiating with the employees. And once you and your coworkers decide to act together at work, the law protects you and the employer has to negotiate with your union. Now there's a process you have to go through to formalize a union, but that's a formality and a topic for another post. But if you want respect at work to control all aspects of how you're treated, like your rate of pay, your health insurance, pension, how you can be disciplined, then the best and only choice you have is to form a union. You can check out some of my other posts on this, download a copy of How to Maximize Your Pay for free at our website, or give us a call and we can help walk you through that process. If you watched our video on what a union is, then you need to know what a union does. Many people think a union gets you more money or gets you benefits like health insurance or a pension. And some people have negative opinions about unions, like all they do is help the bad employees stay employed. But all those things are not what a union does. The only thing that a union does is that it gives you a voice on the job. And you might say, what does that mean? I have a voice. I could speak for myself. Well, the reality is that you can't. When you complain at work, you're simply engaged in glorified begging. Your boss does not have to listen to you. The company is going to make a unilateral decision that works best for them. However, when you form a union at work, your boss, by law, has to listen to you and your coworkers. If the company makes any change at work without first negotiating in good faith with the unionized workforce, then you could file charges against the company and have all those changes reversed. The benefits of more money or fringe benefits are the result of people using that voice at work. Once the company is required to sit down and negotiate with you about your working conditions, pretty much everything about work is up for discussion, and you have the most control that you can have at the workplace. If you want to learn more about how you can use your voice at work and what a union can do for you, give us a call and we can walk you through it. If you've been watching our videos about unions, you might be asking yourself how you can form a union at work. The fast answer is to call us or call a professional union to guide you through the process. But there are some steps you're going to have to take no matter what. First, you have to speak to your coworkers. You can't do this alone. A rule of thumb is that 75% of the group should want union representation. And the easiest way to work this out is to set up a meeting with a union or with us, and we can meet and answer the questions you guys have. If you and your coworkers make the decision to form a union, then you need to get the company to acknowledge that your union exists. This is usually done by filing a petition with the National Labor Relations Board and requesting a secret ballot election to be held at your company, so you and your coworkers can vote on whether or not you want to have a union at work. If you have an election and a majority of people vote for the union, then your union will be certified and your employer is going to have to sit down and negotiate with you and your coworkers. This is a very simplified explanation of the process. The reality is you should have a professional walk you through it. But these are the three main steps that the union process goes through. And in my opinion, the only thing you really need to do is speak to your coworkers, set up a meeting, and have an experienced professional explain and walk you through the process. Give us a call if you want to do that. Are you happy that you have workers' compensation insurance or disability insurance? Or how about Social Security? All of these things that we enjoy as a standard practice in the workplace today are things that working people fought for over 100 years to get. In the past, entire families would be required to work their fingers to the bone in the workplace. Children in working families didn't get to go to school. They went to work in factories or in mines. They had no upward mobility whatsoever. People would die at work all the time or suffer terrible injuries, and they wouldn't have workers' compensation insurance. They'd have to sue the company in court, and many times they lose because the law said that the employee assumed the risk when he took the job. So working people became fed up, and they actually died fighting for the right to form unions and to raise their working standards. Companies would hire people to actually come and physically attack and sometimes kill working people who are protesting for their rights. In fact, the most significant collaboration in advancing the rights of minorities in the civil rights movement was the labor movement. We've lost the idea that we need to stand together collectively and advance our economic standards. We made so many gains, and we have slowly been losing them over the decades because people have forgotten these lessons from the past. So don't make the mistake of standing alone at work. You can get much further by leveraging the labor laws and advancing your cause with you and your coworkers.